There's a lot of exotic species that are held in the pet trade here in the United States. Some states make it illegal. Some states don't have regulations at all in regards to exotics or animals that aren't native to the state.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shana, and this is the American English Podcast. My goal here is to teach you the English spoken in the United States through common expressions, pronunciation tips, and interesting cultural snippets or stories. I hope to keep this fun, useful, and interesting. Let's do it. Hi, everyone. How's it going? In that introduction, you heard a snippet from a video titled An Inside Look at the Exotic Animal Trade. It was made by Vice, and I'll post the link within the transcript. About 2 weeks ago, in the midst of all this coronavirus chaos, a show was going viral on Netflix. In fact, it's still really popular, and it's called Tiger King. I know that many of you have probably watched it, or if you haven't, that you've seen some references to it on social media. If you don't know what in the world I'm talking about, let me refresh you. The show Tiger King is sort of a sensational documentary with a reality show vibe. The show begins with a surprising fact. There are more captive tigers in the US than there are in the wild throughout the world. It then dives into the personal lives of 3 big cat owners in the US who have somewhat intertwined stories, although they live in 3 different states, in Oklahoma, Florida, and South Carolina. 2 of the 3 are polyamorous. In other words, they have multiple relationships at once. 2 may have been involved in murder schemes, 1 possibly in baby cub euthanasia, although we don't really know for sure, it's inconclusive. And all 3 own and care for a lot, probably hundreds, of tigers, lions, and other big cats. Although as viewers, we do get to see a sort of insider view of what it's like to take care of big cats like tigers, it's not really the focus of the show. Many people found this show entertaining because of how shocking the lives of the characters are. Overall, it was not really my cup of tea, but it did lead to a lot of questions that I would like to answer in this episode. The first being, what are the most common pets in the United States? And secondly, what regulations exist in the United States for exotic pets? I mean, living in California, can I just go buy a lion and keep it in my backyard? In short, no. But in today's episode, we'll go over the rules and regulations for exotic pet ownership in the US. So stay tuned for that. Before the fun fact, I'd like to begin by doing a joke, an expression, and some pronunciation exercises. Let's start with the joke. How do you know a cat is annoyed? Any ideas? He's having a hissy fit. So, hissy fit is a kind of a funny term. When a child has a sudden burst of angry or uncontrolled behavior, we say that they're throwing a tantrum. Sometimes adults throw tantrums. When they do, we say they're having a hissy fit. Some say that hissy is just a short form of hysterical, so like a hysterical fit. The reason why this joke is funny is that cats hiss as a sign of aggression. Hissing sounds like hiss, just like the name sounds. We don't normally say that cats have hissy fits. It's usually reserved for humans, often women, although that sounds kind of negative, but that's why the joke is funny. So let's hear that joke one more time. How do you know a cat is annoyed? He's having a hissy fit. So let's move on to the expression of the day, which is a method to madness. Let's begin with the definitions of each individual word first. Method is a noun, and it's a systematic procedure or an approach to accomplish something. You might have a specific method for memorizing vocabulary when studying English. Maybe you learn with flashcards and then write your own sentences. To is a preposition, and it's a condition of reaching or approaching something. So, for example, the woman who threw the hissy fit went from being happy to upset in seconds. Madness is also a noun. And it's frenzied, chaotic activity, like insanity. For example, I do not enjoy going to the mall on Black Friday, right? The day after Thanksgiving. It's the biggest shopping day of the year, and it's just madness. We often use the expression a method to madness, or a method to her madness, or a method to his madness, a method to my madness, to describe a rational decision-making process behind something that seems chaotic to others. Let's go through a few examples to make a little bit more sense of it. So example number 1, have you ever known someone writing a dissertation for their PhD? When I lived in Berlin, there was a point in time when I lived in an international house filled with people of all ages, ethnicities, and interests. And one guy was doing his PhD. I remember one day walking into his room and seeing so many stacks of books and papers. I thought, oh my goodness, he must have a method to this madness. In other words, he must have some sort of self-organization technique that I don't understand. To me, it looks like a giant mess. He must have a method to this madness. Example number 2. Watching my husband, Lucas, cook for the first time would make someone think he's mad. He's crazy. To meat and onions, he might add Worcestershire sauce. I can't even say that word. Worcestershire sauce, barbecue sauce, alcohol, ginger, and like 10 other things that don't seem like they even go together. Oddly enough, what he makes always turns out amazing. If you ask how he does it, he'll say, believe it or not, there's a method to the madness, or there's a method to my madness. In other words, there's a specific and rational approach to his process that may seem completely random to outsiders. He'll explain how he added one ingredient because it's acidic, another because it's sweet, another for salt, etc., etc. There's a method to his madness. For the third example, I'd like to give a personal one. When I left my job in New York City, my company threw a big going away party for me. At the party, someone asked me to tell everybody my plans. I told everyone that I was going to temporarily move to Lithuania and then go to Germany to work on a language startup with friends, which is true. Our company was called Chatterplot. And anyway, about 90% of the office looked at me like I was crazy. But I told them in that moment, when everyone was staring strangely, that there was a method to my madness. In other words, there was rational decision-making involved in what seemed reckless and somewhat chaotic to them. Accommodations were already settled. Money was saved. There was a solid backup plan if it didn't work out. There was a method to the madness. Once again, a method to madness is a rational approach, rational decision-making process, something rational for something that might seem disorganized or chaotic to outsiders. Let's do some pronunciation exercises. In the first exercise, we'll use the statement, there's a method to this madness. Repeat after me. There's a method. There's a method to this. There's a method to this madness. There's a method to this madness. In the conjugation, repeat after me. I have a method to my madness. You have a method to your madness. She has a method to her madness. He has a method to his madness. It has a method to its madness. We have a method to our madness. They have a method to our madness. That's it for the pronunciation exercises. Be sure to repeat them if you find it challenging, and let's move on to the fun fact. Today we'll be talking about exotic pets. But before we begin, what is a pet? Oxford Dictionary says that a pet is a domestic animal or tamed animal that is kept for companionship or pleasure. The most common household pets for Americans are, well, the dog, for one, with 63.4 million American households having at least one dog. In second comes the cat, with 42.7 million households having at least one. In third, freshwater fish, such as neon tetrafish or guppies or goldfish, at 11.5 million households. 5.7 million households have birds, and 5.4 million households have small animals, which can include hamsters, guinea pigs, chinchillas, or rats, even. Many Americans also have horses and reptiles such as snakes, lizards, and turtles. Generally speaking, though, none of the animals I just mentioned are considered exotic, although species of them might be. Different states label different animals as exotic. Although in most circumstances, exotic pets are uncommon, rare even, or simply not native to the location where the owner lives. This can include anything from big cats, like tigers, lions, and cheetahs, to wolf hybrids, bears, primates, hippos, alligators, and so many more animals. When talking about the laws related to pet ownership or exotic pet ownership in the U.S., it's important to first mention the Lacey Act of 1900, which prohibits trade of animals that are illegally possessed or sold. The purpose of the act was to prevent poaching, which is when someone illegally hunts game or catches fish. In the early 1900s, poaching was very common. In fact, poachers would go out of state, kill birds, turkeys, pheasants, or whatever animal they wanted, and then return to their own state to sell its fur or meat for profit. Naturally, locals in poaching hotspots were really angry. Numbers of certain animal species were decreasing. Some animals were even becoming threatened, and one bird, the Carolina parakeet, even went extinct. This was all due to a lack of regulation. The Lacey Act changed that. Once in effect, it held poachers accountable for their actions. In fact, it became a federal crime to kill in other states and to sell in one's own. It also introduced groundbreaking rules to protect plants and animal species native to one state. And these rules still exist today. The first one being, you cannot simply introduce non-native species of plants or animals into a new ecosystem. It could threaten the native habitat. For example, have you ever entered the United States with fresh fruit, vegetables, or seeds? Customs tells you that you need to report those things. Or perhaps have you ever tried to go to Hawaii with a bag of grapes in your backpack? You will also have some issues. The same goes for animals, though. Let's say, for example, you live happily with your pet ferret in the state of Georgia, but your family wants to move to California. In California, you cannot own a ferret as a pet because it's considered a threat to the native ecosystem. So that pet would be considered illegal in California. That brings us to the next point. You cannot transport illegal animals across state lines. So obviously the ferret in the last example would be considered illegal if it were in California, or an animal could be considered illegal if it was obtained or distributed illegally. Let's say, for example, I stole a giraffe from a zoo in another country and brought it to the United States and sold it to you as a private owner. Both of us would be responsible. And both of us would have to pay fines. Even if you were unaware that I stole that giraffe, you'd likely be fined up to $100,000. So even though these laws are in place, there's still a challenge for the government to track exotic animal trade because it often happens on the black market and usually over the internet. It makes it impossible to know the numbers of animals in existence in the United States and who their owners are. The numbers you come across when you're researching exotic pets are usually estimations. So, like many laws in the United States, when it comes to private ownership of exotic pets, each state has its own authority. That means that each state decides which animals are allowed as pets and which ones are strictly banned. 19 states out of the 50 have strict bans on exotic animals as pets. 12 states have partial bans, meaning that some exotic animals are allowed. 14 states require licenses to obtain exotic animals, and 5 states do not require a license at all to have even dangerous exotic animals, although they might regulate some other things, like how it came into the state, for example. Let's look at a few of the strict states, in other words, the states that have bans on exotic animals, and then we'll examine some of the states that are more relaxed. Hawaii, for example, is considered the strictest of the U.S. states. It's an island, or an island chain, I should say, and non-native species introduced could do irreparable damage to the environment and to their local economy. Only standard pets are allowed in Hawaii, so cats and the dogs, etc. Like all states, strict states analyze which animals pose threats to the natural habitat. It doesn't matter if they're the size of a papaya or the size of an elephant, right? A threat is a threat, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife determines that. In both California and Colorado, which are 2 other strict states, although you can't have primates or big cats, hedgehogs or ferrets, you can have alpacas, camels, and zebras as pets, which may sound odd to many. In fact, privately owned zebras are common across the U.S. There are an estimated 3,000 zebras in American backyards. And this is kind of on a side note, but I have to mention it. There are also an estimated 22 zonkies in the U.S. You heard me right, zonkie, which are a hybrid of zebras and donkeys, and 13 zorses, which is a hybrid of zebras and horses. And if you haven't heard of either of those, please look them up. You will not be disappointed. In any case, in the strict states where bans do exist, there are some animals that are allowed that others, maybe even you would consider exotic. Now, moving on to the moderate states, I'd like to talk about Texas. It's easier to talk about one state than a variety. So you need a license in Texas to own a lot of different types of exotic animals, but you can still have access to a wide range of animals there. For example, without a license, I could have a capybara, the massive Brazilian hamster I talked about, I think in episode number 53. Or with a license, anything from a sloth to a tiger. As an owner, though, apart from creating the ideal living environment to make this exotic animal survive and hopefully thrive, you'll have to face some challenges when getting the license. First of all, you would need to go to the city or the county to the animal control department and register the animal. If you don't register the animal, it's considered a misdemeanor, meaning a crime less than a felony, but it's a crime nonetheless, and you'll have to pay a fine. And to register, you'll also have to prove that you can take care of the animal, that it has a good living environment, and you'll also have to have at least $100,000 in liability insurance. Interestingly, people who do own exotic animals, as well as the animal control department, will give a fair amount of warnings and caution when someone is trying to get an exotic animal, because it is such a huge commitment, even for experienced exotic pet owners. It's really common, actually, for new owners to give up their exotic animal at some point because it's either too expensive or it's not what the pet owner expected. Pets are, of course, also a liability. If, for example, I don't want to say a sloth is so slow, but say, for example, your tiger escapes and hurts someone, as the owner, you'll have to pay for the damages. That brings us to the 5 states with very relaxed laws when it comes to exotic pet ownership: Alabama, Nevada, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. There are no laws regarding ownership of bears, primates, big cats, some reptiles, and many other exotic animals. Then again, a lot of states have laws within specific cities. So it's something to pay attention to if you are in a specific area and you do plan on owning an exotic animal. You have to check whether it's permitted in the city. For example, in Janesburg, Wisconsin, it's not possible to own animals that will likely attack people, which is pretty reasonable, I would say. You will need a permit to sell, exhibit, or do research on warm-blooded animals. That means if you have a petting zoo or a regular zoo or even a lab, you will have to have these permits. You will be regularly inspected by the USDA as part of the Animal Welfare Act. So even though private ownership is deregulated, animal treatment is highly regulated in some areas. Let's wrap this up. In the words of National Geographic, exotic pet ownership is a very complicated and often controversial relationship that is often portrayed and understood in a narrow and simplistic way. I'll leave you to form your own opinion about exotic pet ownership. I hope that with this episode, you have a better general understanding of how the states deal with this topic. And to answer my first question, can I just go buy a lion and keep it in my backyard? By law, not in California, right? Not unless it's on the black market. So regardless of where you are in the states, you need to be sure that your animal is not just legally permitted by the state and city where you live, but that whoever you bought it from obtained it legally or bred it legally, just to avoid breaking the Lacey Act. If you decide that you want to get an exotic pet, it would also be smart to consult owners of pets that already own the animal you want to own, just to know what commitment you're getting into, because at the end of the day, everyone, as far as I'm aware, wants animals to thrive, whether they're just your standard pets, your dogs or your cats, or the exotic ones. So that's it for this episode. There are quite a few fun facts that are just too much to share for now. And until next time, bye.